Good afternoon, Voinstein. Welcome on VH Berries.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
I am extremely grateful. How are you How are you going? How are you doing today in Auckland, New Zealand?
I am very good. I'm a little jet lagged. And my wife is a little ill because we've been sort of flying all around. We've just come from London via Los Angeles. So, yeah, we're a bit all over the place, but it's a wonderful city and the food is great and I'm very greedy. So I'm very happy.
You're very happy going from one world to another one. And I would love to start with two words. Which are be and be, because the first one is a verb and the second one is the name of a winged insect closely related to ants and wasps. And I would love to start with those three be engaged, be vocal, be uncomplicated.
I love that. Lovely sentiments. That's words to live your life by, Victor. It's great.
I would love to discuss about one of your first projects called Youssef is Complicated. Can you tell us a little bit more about this short film?
Of course, yeah. It was. I heard a story when I was driving to work. I worked as an assistant director for many, many years before I became a writer and director. And I was listening to the radio at stupid o'clock in the morning. It must have been about like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And there was a story on Radio 4, which was about a young boy who washed up on the shores of Italy. He was a refugee who had come across on one of the most dangerous crossings that you can do in Europe, which is from North Africa to Italy. And he was about to be institutionalized because he didn't say anything and they couldn't get any information about him or his past or why he was there. And he'd been in a refugee camp for about 6 months. Basically they were almost about to institutionalize him and they thought he was sort of catatonic. And he said in halting Italian, he had basically learned Italian by hearing it from throughout the camp, that he just didn't have anything to say. He hadn't said anything because there was nothing to say. And he just had the most harrowing life story. It was absolutely awful what he had been through. And I was really interested in sort of the treatment of refugees in the UK. There's been a sort of really horrible and quite vitriolic xenophobia around the migrant and refugee crisis in Europe and particularly in Britain. I think for sort of the last 10 years, there's really ugly language around it, and the way that we in a very embarrassing way perceive the refugee and the migrant crisis, and how we sort of, I say we, it's not me, I hope, we sort of think of them and, the language they use, like invasion and hordes and pests and all these awful, awful things that they say about these people who are having to uproot their lives to escape war and famine and are risking everything to come across on these tiny boats, from making these huge journeys across France, and they're met with nothing but disdain and scorn in the UK. And it disgusts me. And it disgusts a lot of people. And it really inspired me to make a film about it. And at the time, when I wrote it in 2013, we were sort of in the last throes of the Iraq War and everything that was going on in the Middle East at the time. So I decided to reframe it around an Iraqi refugee, an Iraqi orphan who made the journey across Europe by himself, called Youssef. And a kindly teacher sort of befriends him, even though he's basically mute. He is sort of everything he knows is taken away from him. He loses, as we discover in the story, he loses his family, he loses his parents, he loses his entire life, and he makes this incredibly dangerous journey, and then he ends up in the system in the UK, treated badly, living in a really sad and very lonely world. And a teacher encourages him to talk about his life, and she does that in a very subtle way. She talks about she poses an essay to the class and says, "Write an essay about the day that changed your life." And Yusuf is on the verge of being expelled. He's on the verge of going into social care because of his bad behaviour. He fights at school. He's almost blinded a boy who teased him. And he decides to take up the mantle, to take up the challenge. And he writes an essay which he reads to the class about what he's been through. And I think one of the things that really inspired me to write it, as well as, that story I heard, was this idea that sort of everyone has these backstories, and behind everyone's, behind everyone's face, there is a story that is often, we're never aware of what people are dealing with. It's very hard for us to understand and quantify what people go through. And we as a society often don't listen, and we're very judgmental. And I sort of really wanted to explore that with this short film. So the idea of Yusuf is complicated, which is the first line of the film, is this idea that to explore firstly the fact we're all complicated, and we all have these pasts, sometimes tragic, that we hide from the world, but also to, on a sort of more political level, to sort of discuss the refugee crisis and the awful perception that particularly mainstream media gives us of these people and what they're going through.
This story, Weinstein, inspired you to write and direct this 1075 seconds long short film. And if I understood correctly, you actually recorded that piece of art between two locations, both in Liverpool and Eastbury Roads, that are part of, respectively, the city of Crosby and Northwood.
Oh, that's so. No, that's the. but I understand exactly why you think that. So I in order to do it, when you make short films, you beg, borrow, steal, you get whatever equipment and actors you can together, and you use the assets that you have. You call in all favors to make a short film. No one's ever got rich off a short film. And I actually shot it at my old school, a school called Merchant Taylors, and Merchant Taylors has a sister school in Liverpool. So that's where that address is from. So I actually shot it in Northwood, which is in North London. On the outskirts of North London, and I'll always be deeply indebted to my old school for opening up their facilities for it. The pupils in it, Rohan, who played Yusuf, he was from the school. The sister school to that school, the girls' school that they're affiliated with, they were class members. And the brilliant Alex Lawther played the bully. Alex Lawther, who's gone on to do incredible work.
This is where my confusing came from. Weinstein, and one central piece of Yusuf is complicated is, of course, the main character played by Rohan Popat. Can you tell us a little bit more about these performances and also the monologue that is lasting 5 minutes?
For sure, yeah. So Rohan was an inexperienced actor. I auditioned about 30 kids from the school, and Rohan had a sort of natural talent and a natural ability that I just thought was wonderful, and he had a real presence about him, and a sort of innate sadness as well. He was a very serious young man. And the monologue that I wrote for it, which he wrote out, he knew off by heart and hand wrote for himself. That was actually a compilation, a collage of different stories that I had researched about refugee journeys from the Middle East to the UK. So I sort of chose a route for Yusuf from Baghdad to this unnamed town in Essex where this was set, that was a sort of hybrid of a lot of different and very tragic stories that I heard along the way.
Absolutely, Weinstein. And there is also this final sentence, I will try to be better. What is your personal meaning of it?
That's a really good question. I haven't been asked that for a very long time. I think the idea behind that is that he can't be better. Like nothing will make him better for what he's been through, but the cathartic process of sharing it, I guess the idea of being able to explain himself to this class of kids who've kind of ridiculed and bullied him, who are deeply moved and profoundly affected by the trauma that he's been through. And this idea of playing on the double meaning of better, like as in, you know, better behaved, but really to be better, to be better, to heal, to be able to move on, to try and process these incredible, awful traumas that he's been through, and to try and build a new life. You know, the dream of every refugee.
And furthermore, Weinstein, building a new life also means becoming, for example, a leader, which is one of the pieces of advice that was given from Miss Robson. And another case in which becoming a leader is very important would be in the situation of William Monroe running for re-election.
Yeah, that's a very good link. A good link to inheritance. I like that. Good. Very smooth, sir.
Absolutely, Weinstein. I would love to discuss about Inheritance, which is one of your latest feature film. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah, Inheritance was one of the first scripts that I read after I signed with an agency called UTA with a very good friend of mine and my agent, a guy called Jordan Lonner. And I'd said to him that I wanted to direct something that I hadn't written, my first film I wrote and directed a film called Terminal. And he sent a few scripts through from producers who'd enjoyed my film. And one of the first films one of the first scripts that arrived was Inheritance, and I was hooked. I thought it was such a brilliant conceit, this idea of this sort of dynastic American family with their literal monster in the basement, their literal skeleton in the closet, this gaunt, emaciated prisoner that the Archer Monroe, the sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? Not patron. Oh my gosh, it's gone in my head. The figurehead, the figurehead of this family. God, it's totally escaped me. The figurehead of this family had, for reasons that we come to discover, locked in a fallout shelter that was buried on their property in upstate New York. And I loved the idea of this character, Lauren Monroe, who's played by Lily Collins, who tries to separate herself from her family and her family money and her inheritance. She, tries to strike out for herself, and she's fiercely independent and fiercely intelligent, and she becomes a young DA, district attorney in Manhattan. But her father passes away in sort of tragic and mysterious circumstances, and she discovers the inheritance. This man in the basement, played by the brilliant Simon Pegg. And I loved the fact that it was a really brilliantly written psychological thriller, which Matt Kennedy, who wrote it, is a wonderful writer. And I loved the sort of innate satire in it. I loved this idea that this was a film that worked so well as a psychological thriller, but also spoke to the idea of dynastical wealth and privilege, and what people of privilege think that they're above the law, think that they are able to get away with things because of the wealth and status that they're born into. So I found it such an interesting script, and I was very blessed to get a wonderful cast to execute it so well. Well, they did. I hope I did a good job.
Absolutely, Weinstein. And as you just mentioned, the script and the story was developed by Matthew Kennedy. And I would love to know how you worked together, especially to develop the symbolism and imagery of that bunker, of that particular place.
Well, he's a wonderful writer, Matthew, and the two producers, Richard Lewis and David Wolfe, were instrumental in developing it as well. We sort of had this idea that the bunker would be sort of anonymously modelled on a sort of Cold War fallout shelter. So the idea behind it was that, sort of Grandfather Munro that we never met had, this sort of incredible fear of the Russians during the Cold War, and had buried a nuclear fallout shelter in the grounds of his estate in upstate New York. But we wanted the audience to be, we wanted it to be sort of opaque. We wanted it to be mysterious. We didn't want to sort of say that's what it was. But what was fascinating was, as we were sort of researching it, myself and the production designer and the cinematographer, was that they exist kind of all over the East Coast of America. Like, well-off people built fallout shelters sort of all over, like New York State and Baltimore. And this idea that if the balloon went up and the Russians launched missiles, they would have somewhere to go to wait out the nuclear winter. So it was sort of modelled on that. So it has this sort of bizarre and hopefully quite haunted feeling of, the set decoration was very anachronistic. There was stuff that was from sort of the 60s, 70s and 80s. And we kind of had this idea, obviously, Simon's character is kept chained by the neck to sort of a drainage pipe that's running along the ceiling. So there was this real differentiation in the room that's in fact split by a line that Archer had sort of painted roughly to make sure that he never got too close. But they had this very bizarre relationship. The idea was that they sort of had this very unhealthy symbiotic relationship, that Archer used to visit and feed his prisoner, and on Archer's side of the room there was there's an armchair and a lamp, and there's shelves behind that have got board games and drinks and stuff on them, because he used to go there and talk to his captive animal when he wanted to. And obviously on the other side, on Simon's side, you see that he lives this sort of ascetic, like monastic lifestyle, like he's a prisoner, right? Like it was modeled on a prison cell. So yeah, that was the sort of origin behind the bunker and how we chose to design it.
Absolutely, Weinstein. And there is also this particular line that made an important impression on me. I am talking about, it's not about where you are, it's where you will be in 10 moves or 10 years.
Yeah, it's a great line. So the idea, and one of the things that we wanted to do, was to use chess as a metaphor throughout. The idea that both Morgan and Lauren were good chess players, and so was Archer, the father figure. So we the idea that some people see life as a chess game, that you plot out your moves and you maneuver yourself around the board until you're ready to strike. So yeah, that was something that we really wanted to include. There was also the we really liked the sort of the monochrome feel of the chessboard. That was quite prevalent in the design concept. There was a lot of monochrome in it. We used a lot of black and white in terms of costume and design. We used lots of sort of scenes that had sort of very strong opposing colours, you know, sort of green and brown or black and white. As I said, yeah, that monochrome feel, that chessboard feel, plays quite a lot in the film.
In addition, Weinstein, to that very powerful line, there is also behind the screen your vision when it comes to creating this escalation of emotional depth. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you built that tension, especially through the movie?
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, I was very blessed to have world-class actors in the ensemble, which always, you know, casting is half the battle. No, it was yeah. We sort of we wanted it was we sort of conceived the film in sort of as a classical thriller. It starts, you know, we start with a cold opening, this sort of brutal choking scene of Archer, you know, played brilliantly by Patrick Warburton. So we get this big sort of climactic is the wrong word, but this big intense opening, and then there's the slow burn sort of from the funeral through to the reading of the will, and then into you know, the discovery of the bunker. And what we look to do through everything in terms of cinematography and design and score was to sort of have this constantly ramping sense of tension, this kind of gnawing sense that you know, this was obviously a completely alien situation to Lauren. This idea of finding this prisoner buried in the grounds of her family estate. And we wanted to sort of layer that on bit by bit throughout the film as it builds towards its climax, towards its crescendo. And what we very much wanted to do was to sort of explore like the sort of bizarre and very unnerving relationship between Morgan and Lauren. So Morgan, so, you know, in order to get information about why he's there, Morgan sort of gets Lauren to do things for him, like bring him a steak, bring him a bottle of scotch. He's able to, in a sort of Hannibal Lecter-esque way, to get her to perform tasks that he wants that eventually affect his escape.
There is this notion of bringing, as you just mentioned, some scotch, and I would love to make a direct connection with your journey in filmmaking, because you like to say that you went from working for directors to becoming a director, and at the beginning, not bringing the scotch, but probably some coffee and some tea. Can you tell us a little bit more about this journey?
Of course. And I should say, I make an amazing cup of tea and an amazing cafetiere of coffee. On my list of life skills, tea and coffee is very, very high. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I can tell you. I'd always loved film. Always loved film. Again, when I was at school, the school I shot my short film, I was really, really lucky to have a couple of amazing teachers who were truly passionate about film, and they taught modules in film, in film theory and film history. And that was a massive inspiration for me. And I didn't really know how to get into film. I was actually an actor when I was a kid. I did professional work in theatre and bits and bobs on TV. And I realised, going to university in Bristol and studying drama, that firstly I was nowhere near a good enough actor to become a professional actor, but also that I was beginning to tailor my career towards my love of film, my education towards my love of film. And I was very, very lucky. I picked up some work experience on Matthew Vaughan's Stardust between my second and third year at university. I sent in a CV to do work experience, and someone in the production office thought it was funny that my name's Vaughan. It was spelled the same as Matthew Vaughan's surname. So they gave me a call because there was a heat wave going on at Pinewood. Yeah, that's all it takes. That's all it takes. There was a heat wave going on at Pinewood Studios. And so I came in to turn on air conditioning units on E-Stage. That was my job. So we were up on the top of the set. We had these things called agrecos, which are these huge air conditioning units that pump in cold air because the stages are hot anyway, and there was a heat wave going on. And that was it. Like that's how I started. And then I sort of fell in with the visual effects department. They needed another pair of hands, and I just ran around like an idiot in the heat for 2 months. No idea what I was doing, just bringing teas and coffees and lunches and whatever they needed me to do, I was doing. You know, I've always prided myself on, you know, my attention to detail. Like I try to be a sponge. I try and like learn anything possible. There's no better way to, there's no better way to learn to be a filmmaker than to just shut up, be quiet in the background and just watch brilliant people, you know, do it. And I was very, very lucky. I made some good friends on that. I went away, I finished my degree, handed in my dissertation, parted as we all did after we handed our dissertation in. And I got a call, from a friend of mine, who was an assistant director on Stardust, who was an assistant director on something called Rory's First Kiss, which I thought was a romantic comedy. That was the working title for this film. And I answered the phone, like really, really hungover, having just been to a graduation party. And she said, "You need to be in London tomorrow. I've got you some, you know, I need some people to come and help me on Rory's First Kiss," which I thought was a romantic comedy. It turns out Christopher Nolan names all of the sort of the secret project names for his films after his kids. So Inception was Oliver's Arrow, and The Dark Knight was Rory's First Kiss. So my first day on set, with no idea what I was doing, no skills whatsoever, was on The Dark Knight. The scenes shot at the Gotham City Police Department were all shot in a building that's sadly no longer there in East London called Farmerlows. So literally my first day on a film set, fresh out of university, no idea what was going on. Still had black hair at that point. I was watching Christian Bale in full Batman regalia, and the late great Heath Ledger in full Joker makeup, and that was it. I was done. There was nothing else I was going to do for the rest of my life. It was literally the most exciting thing I'd ever seen, and I went on from there. I wanted to learn how to make films practically, and I was very lucky to get in at the ground floor, working as a production assistant or as a runner, and moving my way up through the assistant director ladder. And I tried to, like a sponge, I tried to soak it all in and try and learn everything I possibly could. And then, use it to be as good a writer and director as I can. I pride myself on saying, and my wife, who's an incredible art director, world-class art director, she says the same thing. Like, the thing in film to remember is when you serve your dues, you know innately how things work. And you always say, like, to when you've got an assistant or someone working for you, or, people further down the line, you say, like, what I'm asking you to do, I've done it. There's nothing I'm asking you to do that I haven't done. And I can safely say that.
Absolutely, Weinstein. And if I understood correctly, your recipe was to be named Voin, to be a sponge, and to also have black hair at the time.
Yeah, that's gone very grey. And the beard. The stress has got to me. Yeah. I just, there's nowhere more exciting than a film set to me. There's a peculiar magic to it, to the feeling, the energy, the smells, the sights. It's incredible. And, I realized very, very early on how fortunate I was to have managed to sort of manufacture this opportunity for myself. And I never wanted to let people down. And I wanted to keep learning. And I was very, very lucky. I worked on things from, tiny short films for Channel 4 to, you know, Beauty and the Beast and Wonder Woman and World War Z. And I've been very, very fortunate in the way that my career trajectory took me. It was the best apprenticeship to filmmaking I could have asked for.
And Weinstein, there is, as you just mentioned, the particular smell of a movie set, but probably also the smell of the Bristol Old Vic Theatre. Can you tell us a little bit more about this place that contains two specific rooms, the Theatre Royal and also the Weston Studio?
Yeah, so the Bristol Old Vic is a the theatre itself is a beautiful old Victorian theatre. I think it is. It might be Regency. Bristol. So the University of Bristol, where I went, was affiliated with the Bristol Old Vic, and when I was in my second year at Bristol, the artistic director of the Bristol Old Vic, whose name was Simon Reed, I think. Brilliant artistic director. They did great stuff when I was there. He saw a play that I was in called Terrorism, a play that a lot of us were in that the university put on. And he sort of invited us to come and be part of a Pinter season, Harold Pinter season, who is my absolute favourite playwright. I'm a Pinter obsessive. So this was like a dream come true. And we trained side by side, not in the Bristol Old Vic Theatre, but with the Bristol Old Vic Theatre Company. And that's where I sort of learned to direct, you know, because Simon was an amazing director and we were able to direct pieces and direct, what's the word I'm looking for? Pinter wrote short plays. He wrote one-handers. He wrote plays like The Dumb Waiter and The Room, which were very short. They were sort of 20 minutes, half an hour. And we used to put those on, with, you know, acting in them and directing them and sort of, doing all of fulfilling all the technical roles for each other. And it was an unbelievable experience. Yeah. The Bristol Old Vic is a very special place to me.
It is a very special place for you, Weinstein. And as we just mentioned, you had a very long journey. What would be your pieces of advice?
Don't stop. Like, it's hard. It's not easy. If it I can't remember who said it. I heard Edgar Wright, the brilliant Edgar Wright, doing a podcast, and he was talking about an actor. I don't know who it was. It was John Bernthal. He told a great story about John Bernthal, and he said, for whatever reason, John had to keep coming back to do different bits of scenes in Baby Driver. And Edgar said to him, you know, thanks so much, and I'm sorry you had to keep back. And John Bernthal said, hey, if it was easy, any arsehole would do it. And that's really stuck in my mind as being a brilliant way of looking at it. It's yeah, you've just got to keep working at it. Like, you know, take the opportunities you're given, be a sponge, like, listen, learn, shut up, you know, like really, like be, you know, for every bad day you're having, you know, for every bad day you're having, you know, there's 10,000 people that would give their eye to be in the position you're in. So be grateful and, yeah, to try and learn what you can. I mean, the thing for me was like, I felt that I was very confident in my creative education. Like, you know, I'd always been involved in drama. I'd always loved film, and, you know, I studied it to a very high level. But, you know, in terms of practical filmmaking, I knew absolutely nothing. So, you know, to watch the best technicians, the best filmmakers, the best writers and directors and producers in the world, by, you know, just making good tea and coffee and trying to hang around and, you know, learn what I could was, it was a dream come true. Yeah.
Be grateful and be a sponge. Thank you very much, Weinstein.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Always. Any opportunity to talk about myself, it's great.